Okay, so you want to own a shopping mall. Hundreds of stores under one roof, thousands of shoppers walking through every day, and rent checks arriving from every single tenant like clockwork. A real estate empire that runs itself. Sounds simple. It is not simple. Here's the problem. Almost none of that is how this business actually works. And by the end of this, you'll understand why shopping malls have become one of the most brutally difficult real estate assets in America to keep alive, let alone profitable. Let's start with the entry fee, because buying a mall isn't like buying an apartment building. A mid-size regional mall, something in the range of 800,000 to 1.2 million square feet, with 80 to 120 stores, typically sells for $150 million to $400 million, depending on location, anchor tenant strength, and occupancy rate. And that number assumes the mall is already built and operating. It doesn't include the money you'll immediately need for deferred maintenance. Most aging malls carry $10 to $30 million in overdue roof repairs, HVAC replacement, and parking lot resurfacing that previous owners postponed for years. Add legal fees, environmental assessments, and lender due diligence costs, and you're looking at another $3 million to $8 million just to close the deal. Most buyers finance 65 to 75% of the purchase through commercial mortgage-backed securities or bank syndicates, which still leaves an equity check of $40 million to $140 million in cash you personally have to bring to the table before you own a single square foot. Here's the first trap almost nobody sees coming. Anchor tenant leases, the department stores that occupy 20 to 30% of a mall's total square footage, typically pay dramatically below market rent, sometimes just $2 to $4 per square foot annually, compared to $40 to $60 per square foot for smaller inline stores. Anchors accept this because their presence draws foot traffic that benefits everyone else. But it means your most visible tenants are often your least profitable ones. And many anchor leases include co-tenancy clauses letting them terminate if occupancy drops below a certain threshold, creating a death spiral risk baked directly into the ownership structure from day one. Now let's talk about what happens after you actually take over, because the operating bleed at a mall never stops moving regardless of foot traffic. Common area maintenance, cleaning, security, landscaping, and utilities for shared spaces runs $8 million to $15 million a year for a mall this size. Property taxes on an asset valued at $200 million can easily reach $4 million to $8 million annually. Marketing and mall-wide events, the seasonal decorations, promotional campaigns, and community programming needed to keep shoppers coming cost another $1 million to $3 million a year. Insurance for a property this size, covering liability and business interruption, runs $2 million to $5 million annually. And then there's debt service. On a $250 million mortgage, annual payments alone can reach $15 million to $22 million. Here's the economic reality that will define your entire career in this business. Your costs are largely fixed, but your revenue depends entirely on a retail landscape being reshaped by e-commerce, and that shift is not slowing down. Here's the part the passive income dream skips entirely, and it's the part that actually explains why this business exists in the first place. A mall does not sell shopping. It sells foot traffic. The stores are not really your customers, they're your tenants, and what you're actually monetizing is the number of people who walk past a storefront every single day. This is why anchor stores get subsidized rent, why common areas get expensive renovations, and why some malls have started adding trampoline parks, medical clinics, and apartments, because the entire business model depends on generating a number, foot traffic, that translates into rent that inline tenants are willing to pay based on their own sales per square foot. Now let's follow $1 of rent and see how little of it actually becomes profit. A mid-size retailer pays $50 per square foot annually, generating meaningful gross rent across their space. Roughly $18 of every $50 goes straight to debt service on the mortgage that financed the property. Another $12 covers common area maintenance and property taxes, both largely fixed regardless of how the mall performs. Marketing and mall operations absorb another $4. Insurance and administrative overhead eat roughly $3. What's left as operating profit is around $13 per square foot, and that's before accounting for the anchor tenants next door, paying a fraction of that rate for a much larger footprint, dragging down your blended average significantly. Miss your occupancy target by even 10%. Common in a market where retailers are closing physical locations, and that margin can evaporate entirely. So let's run two versions of the same mall and see how differently this can play out. In the optimistic scenario, your mall maintains 92% occupancy. All three anchor stores remain open and financially healthy, and inline tenant sales per square foot grow 3% a year as you successfully add experiential tenants like restaurants and entertainment venues that don't compete with e-commerce. Annual net operating income reaches roughly $32 million. After debt service of $20 million, you're clearing approximately $12 million in annual profit, and the property appreciates as investors increasingly value malls that have successfully diversified beyond traditional retail. Now here's the realistic scenario. Using the exact same mall, the exact same starting assumptions. One anchor department store chain files for bankruptcy and closes its location, triggering co-tenancy clauses that let 15 smaller inline tenants terminate their leases early or demand significant rent reductions. Occupancy drops to 74% within 18 months. The empty anchor box sits vacant for 2 years because finding a replacement tenant willing to take 150,000 square feet is exceptionally difficult in the current retail environment. Net operating income falls to just $14 million, but your $20 million debt service obligation doesn't change at all. That $12 million optimistic profit doesn't just shrink. It becomes a $6 million annual loss, and you're now negotiating with lenders about loan modifications while trying to find any tenant willing to fill a vacant department store the size of a football field. The operators who actually survive and thrive in this business long-term aren't the ones who built the most impressive food court or negotiated the flashiest anchor tenant deal. They're the ones who diversified aggressively away from pure retail early, converting vacant anchor spaces into medical offices, apartments, or logistics space, negotiating shorter leases with co-tenancy protections removed, and building cash reserves specifically sized for the eventual loss of at least one major anchor tenant. A shopping mall, at the end of the day, isn't really a retail business at all. It's a foot traffic monetization machine wrapped in outdated real estate assumptions, where the fine print in a single anchor tenant's lease, negotiated years before an economic downturn or e-commerce shift ever hits, decides who actually survives long enough to see the property through to redevelopment or ruin.